welcome to next session of Girmit Focus, and I'm Satish Rai. In the previous session, I talked about linking Girmit, Fiji's Girmit, which started in 1879, to slavery, and then to start off indenture way back in 1830s, which replaced slavery, and stated that transportation of Indians to Fiji took place 50 years after the first Indians were transported to Mauritius. And I promised I'm going to talk about the recruitment of Indians to Fiji, but I want to preface that by talking a bit about the conditions in India, and why the Indians were targeted, and also try to dispel the common views espoused by the historians for over 1 century, both by local historians and by the European historians, who by nature were talking on behalf of the colonizers and not necessarily talking on behalf of those who were colonized, and especially not on behalf of the Indians who were captured and transported to Fiji and other colonies, and mostly they wrote about justification of this human trade. There were some exceptions, and I would like to note that I was impressed by Gillian's books, and he tried his best also to provide voices to the Fiji Girmitias. But as I read through the history books written by the Europeans and later written by our own people, I came across a number of terminologies which I personally found distasteful, and I wondered why they wrote. And one of the things they wrote about, and which is now commonly held views in Fiji and in the Fijian diaspora, is that the Indians left India for greener pastures, and they talked about the push factor. And I would like to state now that I think personally that talking about the push factor is unwarranted and non-productive when discussing about the transportation of Indians to Fiji and the other colonies, because basically when the Europeans decided that they are going to take laborers, people to work on the plantations, they were in power and they're going to take whoever they wanted, and the Indians in India could not do much to prevent that, because at that time India was ruled by Britain. And so talking about the push factor is like talking about why the African were captured and enslaved and taken to Americas. Is it a worthwhile discussion to say that there were conditions in Africa at that time which compelled the Africans to surrender themselves and agree to is enslaved and taken to Africa. I'm sure there were places in Africa where there were poverty, and I'm also convinced there were places in Africa where people lived in better conditions, and there could be places in Africa which were thriving. Same as in India, people who have visited India and toured India extensively, as I have done, all around India, you'll find there are places in India which are in need of development even today, and there are areas which are very, very impressive at the moment. And if you think back only 100 years ago, you can stand on the location and think, why would people willingly leave those areas and go to an unknown place and to an unknown type of life? I'll talk about that bit more, and let me also say a bit about what the Europeans were up to those days, and link it to this the push factor. When they went to Americas, as I said before, if you're talking about push factor, then we also have to consider, why the American Indians did not resist to the Europeans, and of course they did, but they had only probably basic weaponry against the guns and other weapons which the Europeans had. So it's a little point, talking about why didn't they resist the Europeans, because Europeans were there to take over their land, which they did by whatever means they could. And same over here, where we're living at the moment in Australia. They came and they conquered and they wiped out basically the Aboriginal people over here using guns. And so is it worthwhile talking about why didn't the Aboriginal people resist? So what I'm saying is that it's useless in this discussion to talk about what factors existed in India when the Europeans decided to capture and take 1.2 million Indians to all over their colonies to work on their plantations, because once the Europeans had made their mind up that they're going to take Indians to the colonies, they did that and nothing would have stopped that. So whether the Indians were rich, poor, starving, or whatsoever, they would have been captured and taken by Europeans to the colonies, and that's exactly what happened in case of Fiji. So as I go along, I'll be talking about these issues, dispelling some of the myths which have been propagated by the European writers, historians, and which have been parroted by our own historians, and is gone down to the common people. And when I see people writing the same thing on the Facebook and other social media, and when I go around talking to people, they are repeating the same thing, and at least it's in my opinion that it is not useful. You have to have a lateral thinking. You have to realize that what the European historians wrote was in justification of their inhuman labor trade, and our historians should have realized that and try to read history with an open mind from the point of view of those who were colonized. And as I go along, I'll be doing that, and I'll be providing more information about how and why the Indians who were taken to Fiji were recruited and how they were transported and so on. So for today, that's all. And until the next time, it's goodbye from me. Thank you for watching.